1968. Near the border of dense jungle territory. The air inside the temporary command hut was thick with sweat, cigarette smoke, and overconfidence. A group of U.S. officers leaned over a map pinned to a plywood wall. Red grease pencil marks circled a patch of jungle that had already chewed up 2 patrols. One captain smirked, tapping the map. "So, this is where they're sending the Australians?" A few quiet chuckles spread around the table. Another officer shook his head. "Yeah, those guys, the hat-wearing bush trackers. Let's see how long they last out there." More laughter. To the Americans, the Australian unit looked strange. Different uniforms, different slang, less formal. No flashy briefings, no dramatic speeches. Just quiet men checking their gear and asking detailed questions about terrain, water flow, and animal trails. It didn't impress anyone in the U.S. command tent. In fact, it made them nervous. And when soldiers get nervous, they often turn it into jokes. Outside the tent, the Australian patrol moved with slow, deliberate calm. No loud talking, no bragging, no dramatic gestures. Their patrol leader knelt near a patch of disturbed leaves. He didn't touch it, just studied it. 2 days old, he muttered. They're watching this trail. One of his men nodded. No surprise, no fear, just confirmation. These soldiers weren't interested in looking tough. They were interested in coming back alive. Back at U.S. headquarters, by nightfall, radio chatter filled the American communications station. Not panic, not gunfire, not requests for air support. Just calm, low voices from the Australian patrol reporting. Enemy supply trail, located hidden bunker entrances mapped. Movement patterns, identified ambush routes avoided. An American sergeant listening to the radio frowned. How are they finding all this without getting hit? No one answered, because the truth was uncomfortable. The Australians weren't charging through the jungle. They were reading it. The first realization. The next morning, aerial recon confirmed something shocking. The Australians had slipped past multiple hidden enemy positions that U.S. patrols had walked straight into the week before. No firefights, no casualties, no dramatic heroics. Just patience, observation, silence. One of the same officers who had laughed the day before stared at the new intel photos. His jaw tightened. They didn't blunder through. They went around everything. The room was quiet now. No jokes. Because for the first time, the Americans understood something they hadn't wanted to admit. Those idiots had just outplayed them, without firing a single shot. The briefing room felt different now. No jokes, no smirks, just quiet frustration. A U.S. lieutenant stood at the map, tapping the same jungle sector the Australians had just crossed without a scratch. "They move slow. They avoid trails. They read the ground," he said. "Fine. We can do that too." Some of the men nodded. Others looked unsure. Slowing down meant patience. Patience meant discipline. And discipline was hard when you were used to overwhelming firepower solving most problems. But pride was louder than doubt. By mid-morning, an American platoon stepped off into the same jungle. Same terrain, same mission, same plan. At least on paper. The jungle doesn't care about plans. Within minutes, the difference showed. Boots snapped twigs. Metal gear clinked softly. Someone whispered too loudly. Small things, harmless things. But in jungle warfare, small sounds travel far. The platoon leader raised a hand, signaling a halt. He tried to remember what he'd heard about the Australians. Watch the ground. Don't skyline yourself. Move like you're being watched. But knowing the rules and living them were two very different things. Behind them, one soldier wiped sweat from his eyes and shifted his rifle. He never saw the thin wire stretched low across the path. The moment, everything changed. The click was soft, almost polite. For half a second, nobody reacted. The jungle was full of strange noises. Then came the explosion. Dirt, smoke, and leaves blasted upward. 2 men hit the ground hard. Others dove for cover, hearts hammering, ears ringing. No visible enemy. No clear target. Just the jungle swallowing them in noise and confusion. "Contact! Where?" someone yelled. But there was no gunfire, only silence again, the worst kind. Hard lesson. Hours later, back at base, the casualty report lay on the same table where the laughter had been the day before. No one was laughing now. An older sergeant who'd listened to the Australian radio chatter earlier shook his head slowly. "They didn't just walk different," he said quietly. "They thought different." That was the part no map could show, and no pride wanted to admit. The jungle was quiet again. Too quiet. The American platoon moved slower now, not by choice but because every step felt heavier after what had happened. Eyes scanned the ground constantly. Every vine looked like a trap. Every shadow looked like someone watching. They weren't hunting anymore. They were surviving. By midday, radio contact brought unexpected orders. "You'll be linking up with an Allied patrol already operating in your sector." No name mentioned, but everyone knew who it was. The meeting. They saw them before they heard them. Australian soldiers emerged from the foliage like they belonged there. Calm, controlled, almost relaxed. No rushing, no unnecessary movement. Just quiet awareness. The American lieutenant stepped forward, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're to operate together from here on." The Australian patrol leader nodded once. No smirk. No, "told you so." Just a simple response. "All right then, stay in our tracks." That was it. Not an insult, not a joke. An instruction. A different way of moving. Within minutes, the Americans noticed something strange. The Australians didn't push through the jungle. They flowed through it. They stepped where roots were firm, not where leaves looked soft. They avoided obvious cover, choosing positions that gave vision instead of comfort. They paused often, not from fear, but to listen, really listen. At one stop, an Australian soldier crouched and pointed at the ground. Barely visible marks in the dirt. "3 men. Passed this morning. Heavy load." The Americans stared. They saw nothing, but they believed him, because belief had replaced pride, the ambush that never happened. Late afternoon. The patrol halted suddenly. One Australian raised a closed fist. Everyone froze instantly. Americans included this time. The patrol leader studied a narrow stretch of trail ahead. Something wasn't right. No birds, no insects, no sound at all. He slowly signaled a wide detour through thicker terrain. 20 tense minutes later, they circled back and observed the trail from higher ground. There it was. A carefully hidden ambush position aimed exactly where they would have walked. One American soldier whispered, "We would have gone straight through that." The Australian beside him didn't answer. He didn't need to. Respect. Earned. That night, as they set a quiet perimeter, the same American sergeant who had laughed days earlier sat beside an Australian by a small, shielded cooking flame. No jokes now, just honesty. "We thought you guys were reckless," he admitted. The Australian took a sip from his canteen. "Nah," he said calmly. "We just learned early what happens when you rush." The jungle hummed around them, and for the first time the Americans weren't trying to prove anything. They were trying to learn. Dawn came slow and gray, the jungle wrapped in a low blanket of mist. Both patrols were already awake. No chatter, no unnecessary movement, just quiet preparation. Gear checked, rifles cleaned, eyes scanning tree lines that looked identical to 100 others, but could hide anything. Today wasn't just another patrol. It was a joint operation. Intelligence suggested a key enemy supply group would move through a narrow jungle corridor by midday. If they slipped through, more traps, more weapons, more trouble would follow. This time, the Americans didn't plan the route. They followed, moving as one. The formation was different now. Australians up front, reading the ground, choosing paths, setting the rhythm. Americans behind, watching, copying, learning. And something had changed. Where boots once crashed through undergrowth, they now stepped carefully between roots. Where men once talked in whispers, they now communicated with hand signals. Where tension once caused mistakes, now it sharpened focus. They weren't two units anymore. They were one patrol with two accents. Signs of trouble. Mid-morning, the lead Australian scout froze and slowly crouched. A hand signal passed back instantly. Everyone down. He brushed aside leaves, revealing faint impressions in damp soil. Recent. Heavy. More than a few men. He looked back at the American lieutenant and made a circling motion with his finger, then pointed to a low ridge to the east. Flank position. Cut them off. No words spoken. None needed. The Americans nodded and moved, quietly, efficiently, into position. Days ago, they might have hesitated. Now they trusted, waiting in silence. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. Sweat rolled down faces. Ants crawled over sleeves. Muscles ached from holding still. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, faintly, voices. Distant at first, then closer. Shapes appeared between trees. Enemy soldiers moving casually along the exact trail the patrol had avoided. They walked straight toward the trap that wasn't there anymore, because now the trap belonged to someone else. The Australian patrol leader glanced toward the American lieutenant across the clearing. A small nod. "You ready?" The lieutenant nodded back. Ready. The jungle held its breath. From their concealed positions, the combined patrol watched the enemy column move into the narrow corridor below. Boots crushed leaves. Weapons hung loosely on shoulders. They had no idea they were being observed from 3 directions. The Australians didn't rush. They waited for the exact moment, when the entire group was inside the kill zone, when escape routes were covered, when surprise would do more than bullets ever could. The Australian patrol leader gave a subtle hand signal. Now. The ambush. The jungle exploded, not with chaos but with precision. Short, controlled bursts. Disciplined fire, clear fields of view. The Americans moved exactly as they'd been shown. No shouting. No panic. No wasted movement. Enemy soldiers scrambled for cover, but there wasn't any. Within minutes, it was over. Silence returned just as quickly as it had shattered. Smoke drifted between trees. Leaves floated down slowly, settling over the battlefield like nothing had happened at all. But something had changed. After the fight. The patrol regrouped, checking positions, scanning for any remaining threats. No reckless pursuit, no celebration, just calm professionalism. An American soldier who had once laughed in that briefing tent now stood beside the same Australian who had shown him how to move through the jungle days earlier. He gave a quiet nod. "You saved us more than once out here." The Australian adjusted his gear and shrugged slightly. "You listened. That's what mattered." Not pride, not rivalry, just soldiers who had learned to trust each other when it counted, back at base. When they returned, the atmosphere inside the command tent felt nothing like before. The same map was on the wall, the same jungle sector circled. But now, when someone mentioned the Australians, no one laughed. Instead, one officer said quietly, "Next time we go in there, we go in like they do." No argument followed, because respect earned in the jungle didn't need debate. Final line. The jungle didn't care about rank, reputation, or pride. It only respected those willing to learn. And that lesson came at a price no one in that room would ever forget.